All right, welcome back, everybody. This is my DIY recording for educators series, video 2. If you want an introduction to the series and a list of reasons why I'm putting this together, you can go watch the previous video, which is appropriately enough called Introduction. But for now, we're just going to go right into the presentation. So before I go over the actual setup for how I have everything situated in my home studio space, I wanted to go over some of the philosophy and some of the concepts behind this particular setup, and why it's going to be useful for the particular kind of recording that I'm trying to demonstrate, which is a sort of low, no touch, low cost, low to no post-production solution for recording educational videos that can be put on the internet for your online courses or your instructional courses, your instructional videos, or whatever platform, Coursera, edX, YouTube, whatever. So the first inspiration and the main model for how I set everything up was actually from the gaming community centered around live streaming, people playing video games. As you can tell, I'm a huge nerd about this kind of stuff. The main platform for that kind of stuff is a website called Twitch TV, where people will have a home recording setup pretty similar to what I have now. They have a camera, they have a decent microphone, maybe they have some lights, but their main content is they're actually live casting their own video game playing to a live audience that they can talk with, that they can chat with on that twitch.tv platform. And one of my favorite streamers to watch is a guy called Sean Plott, also known as Day9. And I've been a huge fan of his setup for a while, because he clearly puts a lot of thought into what his audio sounds like, what his video looks like, and what kind of quality he wants to put out there. And full disclosure, I'm not a gamer actually, but I watch him for his personality, and he's got a ton of funny stories, and he's just a wonderful streamer in general. So, both content-wise and technically wise, check out his channel if you want to see more of what I'm talking about. He does actually have an educational series up that he's done very recently, which is about the game StarCraft. So definitely check him out. Highly recommend him, twitch.tv/day9tv. So the other source of inspiration was a tutorial that I found by a website called Wistia, called the Down and Dirty DIY Lighting Kit. This is a bit of a departure for me in terms of what I look for in the equipment that I buy, but this was one of the best tutorials that I found for creating lighting on not necessarily a lower budget, but it's a bit more of an accessible setup than trying to find professional lights and professional stands. And it's really geared towards, companies, brands, startups who want to be able to create good-looking, good-sounding content without, having to hire a full studio. So, again, the link is below the image there. I highly recommend you check them out. And my lighting setup is very, very heavily based on this tutorial, but there are certain ways that it is going to deviate from it. And those are for very specific reasons, but I'll get into that in a bit. Okay, so the criteria. As I said in my previous video, I'm a video person by trade. And so the criteria that I have for how I would want my videos to look is probably going to differ from yours a bit about how your videos are going to look. But there are certain benchmarks for quality that I wanted to adhere to, and also certain pet peeves that I have that I didn't want to fall into. But this is meant to be good for you as well in your setup. So the first thing that I wanted my setup to be was compact. And that means that all my peripherals, my lights, my microphone, my camera, everything is attached directly to my desk. Nothing is on floor stands. This is a bit of a departure from how most studios and most recording things are set up. But there's a very specific reason that I wanted to do it this way. And the reason was that I wanted this to be the kind of thing that you could put on your desk at home or in your office, assuming it actually has a lip that you can clamp things to. And the other thing that I became a little maybe over obsessed with was this idea that if you had some kind of desk that was adjustable, like if you had a sitting standing desk, that this entire setup would travel with the desk no matter what height you had it at. And I'm a big fan of kind of the standing setup. I know a lot of faculty don't like to sit, because you tend to slouch and it affects your presentation and it's a bit too casual and all this. So I really wanted to make something that would be about as versatile as your desk setup would allow it to be. So camera placed at eye level. This is one of those video things that for me is a bit of a pet peeve, maybe not necessarily justifiably, but I hate when the camera, when the camera is placed on top of your monitor, to me, it looks like a surveillance camera or a Skype call. When it's placed below your monitor, it's not a very flattering angle. You end up looking up people's nose and, making their chins bigger and all that. So as a video person, we really try to keep everything at or slightly above eye level so that everything's nice and even. It doesn't look like we're looking at you from a surveillance camera. And it really enhances the engagement with the viewer who's going to see it on the back end. So that was my second requirement. Mac or PC, really what I mean by this is that I wanted a setup that could work for pretty much any computer that you can throw at it. Assuming that it has USB inputs, you can use the hardware and the software with Mac, with PC, I think also with Linux. I have to check one of the programs that I'm using. I'm not entirely sure that is compatible with Linux. I'll tell you exactly which one when I get to that part. But again, the whole idea is versatility. So I wanted it to be as universal in terms of technology as possible. Microphone placed outside of camera view and still give good, clean sound. Again, this is a bit of a departure. A lot of the streams that you'll see on something like Twitch, a lot of them, in addition to having the camera looking at the subject top down, which I said I didn't want to do, but they'll also have the microphone right in front of their face, which is good for audio. If you're mainly concerned about your audio and you don't necessarily really care about your video, which a lot of these streamers, for them, that's probably the case because they're trying to focus more on the game content than on the quality of their actual, camera stream. For me, though, I wanted a more traditional looking video presentation style. And I just don't like, having to cover someone's face with a microphone. This has probably created a lot more problems for myself than I needed to. I'll tell you why when I get to the actual equipment, but, you don't necessarily have to agree with this requirement. You don't necessarily need to agree with any of these requirements. But for me, this was actually really important. And finally, the ability to live switch between inputs and scenes. So being able to do something like this in real time, to me, was the crux of being able to conform to that demand of creating a video that you could just post online as soon as you were done. When you're using something like Camtasia, which I know a lot of you probably are, my main gripe with Camtasia is that you can't do this kind of, live switching of inputs, and you by design, you have to do some editing. And I know a lot of people that are kind of uncomfortable with that. With anything, it takes practice. So assuming you're okay with practicing that kind of thing, that's awesome. You can use Camtasia to your heart's content. And there are going to be certain pros to doing that, which I'll go into later. But, for me, this requirement stems from that desire to have as to minimize the requirement for post-production as much as possible. So getting into the gear that I eventually came up with and that is fueling the stream, or this recording, the camera is just a Logitech C920 webcam, perfectly standard. You know, a lot of people have these. There's also a C922 webcam that's a bit more expensive. I'm not really convinced that there's a huge difference in the quality between them. For my purposes, you know, since I'm content on being pretty small in the screen for most of the presentation, since most of the presentation is going to be PowerPoint, you know, this is certainly perfect for my needs, because it, you know, highest 1080 resolution. A downside to it is you can't actually control the frame rate manually. The frame rate is actually a function of how much how much processing the camera is doing. So how much you have the brightness turned up, how much you have the gain turned up, how much you have the you know, what kind of color balance you have. Those are all going to dictate what your actual frame rate is. But if you have good lighting, then it's going to be a pretty smooth option. And for only $50, you know, it's one of the lowest cost solutions I could find where you're not sacrificing a ton of quality for what you get in the value. The microphone that I'm using is a Blue Yeti microphone. And this was a bit of a hassle to come up with, because originally I was using the Blue Snowball, which is a tier down from the Yeti, and it's what a lot of streamers use. The issue for me was that because one of my requirements was that I not have the microphone right here in full view of the camera, the Blue Snowball really necessitates that closeness. And I just could not, you know, the combination of trying to have the microphone not so close, the fact that my computer fans are really loud, like it's a really souped up computer, and the fact that I'm not really a loud speaker by nature, you know, I don't project very well. All those three things meant I had to do a lot of audio processing to get a clean sound. And the Blue Snowball, just for whatever reason, was not doing what I needed it to do. It just did not sound good. So I upgraded to the Blue Yeti. Besides my computer and besides my Wacom tablet, this is the most expensive piece of equipment that I have going right now, but totally worth it. And the peripherals, you know, the reason I got these is, again, because I wanted everything to, you know, be localized to my home desk, but I didn't really want it to sit on the desk, because, you know, doing that, you get a lot of, in terms of sound, you get a lot of the banging and the, you know, clacking of your peripherals, and it gets in the way. And then in terms of video, you know, if you have it on the desk, then it's by nature looking up at you, and I didn't really want that. So I have a flex arm camera mount that's pretty good. It's actually clamped to the back of my desk, and it's coming up underneath my monitor, and it's sitting kind of in front of the monitor right now. So it's actually cutting off a part of my monitor, but that's okay because I don't have anything going on that part of the monitor anyway. The mic scissor arm stand, same deal. You know, it's just elevating the microphone up from the desk a little bit so that the banging and the, you know, the keyboard and all that, so that it's also to minimize that kind of sound, and it's also well away from where I would be reaching. You know, I can reach my keyboard, I can reach my tablet, I can draw, I can move my hands a little bit, and I can be, you know, relatively safe and not banging the microphone and creating lots of thuds. Pop filter, I don't know exactly how much this is actually helping me since I'm not right up at the microphone. You know, typically a pop filter is meant to minimize those p's and b sounds that you get when you're really up close. I have one just because, you know, I might as well. If I'm doing something that's audio only, then I'll obviously be closer to the mic, and then that would actually help a lot. So, and it's not very expensive, so I thought, you know, I might as well. So the lighting. This is where it gets a little a little off the rails for me in terms of being a professional video editor and a professional videographer in the past. So this equipment is taken directly from that Wistia article about creating a lighting setup that is low cost and really easy to get. Everything I got was from Home Depot, and I'll put a link to that. And like this is taken directly from that. It's a pretty good setup. I think the lighting is okay. One of the reasons I chose this lighting setup rather than a similar one you can get online that's a bit more professional. It comes with stands. It comes with these big diffusion umbrellas. The reason I didn't want that is because those umbrellas take up a lot of space, and it also, all of it is on stands on the floor, and like I said, I wanted it to attach to the desk. Now, the mechanism by which I have it attaching to the desk is not from that article. It's something I put together myself, and this is where it kind of goes off the rails, because if you were to hire me to create a video studio for you, even if it were in this kind of same vein, I would not do it this way. This is just something I came up with. I wanted it to clamp to the desk. I wanted the lights to clip to some kind of protrusion. Ideally, it would be something that you could actually adjust the height of the lights on. I thought this might work that way. It turns out it doesn't really. But, in terms of a low-cost kind of DIY solution, this is pretty much the pinnacle of how you're going to get those lights to clamp on your desk. And all it is a couple wooden dowels, rubber banded and zip tied together, because why not? I had both. And a couple C-clamps that are also rubber banded and zip tied together. So they're easy to move, they're easy to remove from the desk. They're easy to move left and right on the desk. Like I said, if you have any suggestions for how to make that setup a bit more stable, I'm totally open to them. I would love to hear from you about, what I could use. One of the reasons I did this was also because I didn't really have any power tools, so I can't drill things to each other. So this is what it is. Not the most stable setup, but I'm confident that nothing's going to fall down or fall apart or anything like that. So, and like I said, this entire setup is not necessarily less expensive than the light stands that you can get on Amazon with the bulbs and the diffusion and the case and all that. And I'll put up a link to the one that I was thinking of buying before I, discovered the Wistia article and just decided to go with it. And you'll kind of see what that looks like. And I haven't tested it out, so I don't know how good of a setup that is, but I'll put it on the website if you want to take a look. And you're totally free to look that up and tell me what the benefits and disadvantages of that are. But like I said, if you have any ways of any ideas for how I could improve these stands with the criteria that they be on the desk, not necessarily sitting on the desk, but be able to clamp to the back, please do let me know. So the software, this is where I actually had a lot of fun. Like I said, I didn't really want to use Camtasia because I did want that ability to live switch between sources and between settings and between, different ways of compositing different sources on top of each other. And the software that I found, and the software that a lot of Twitch streamers use, is this one called Open Broadcaster software. It's totally free, totally open source. There's a lot of documentation on it. There are a lot of tutorials. And as a video person, it's a really great way to customize what your different screens look like. And you can set those to hotkeys on your keyboard. It acts a lot like a hardware switcher would, where you have, you have different sources going to an actual live switch. You have your camera, you have your desktop, you have whatever, you can have 3 different audio sources, you can have 3 different cameras. You can have any combination of split screens you want. You can have any combination of composites. And this software works very similar to that, but it's all software based. So it's all tied to your desktop. Any input that you can connect to your desktop or anything that you can do on your computer can be broadcast and combined with other sources in this software. I'm also using Adobe Audition, and I'm fully aware that Audition is the farthest from a free program. The reason I'm using it is because I have it, because I need Adobe for my job. The reason that I'm using Audition is to be able to do some of that live audio processing. Like I said, to get rid of the sound of the fan, to get rid of the sound of my environment. It does a pretty decent job. But most of the filters that I'm using in Audition are also found in OBS. So this is absolutely not a requirement. You can use OBS for all of this. It's not necessary. The filters in OBS are not necessarily as advanced, but you're going to get a similar result. And Virtual Audio Cable is another open source software. It's just the way to feed the audio from Audition into OBS. Since everything is software based, there aren't any cables to patch, but you still need to be able to get sound from one source to another. So that's where this other free program comes in. And so this is the result. This is how everything looks. Yeah, excuse me, I'm not used to speaking for this long at any given time. I'm just getting some water. So you can see exactly what I have here. So this is the Blue Yeti with the pop filter. These are the lights. These are actually shower curtain diffusers. That was part of the setup that they had on Wistia, and I thought, you know, why not go with it? This is the Logitech camera. Like, as you can see, like, it's not above, it's not below. It's, you know, pretty much right in the middle of where I'd be looking, which is facilitated by this flex stand, and then you have the boom arm for the microphone. And in this left one, you can just see how everything is clamped to the back of the desk. And like I said, these are just wooden dowels that are rubber banded and zip tied together. Here's the clamp. It's not the strongest clamp, so, you know, I was hoping that I could be able to move this kind of up and down, this dowel, to play with the heights, but it turns out that's not really the case, because these clamps and these rotations are not as stable as I was hoping them to be. But like I said, if you had a standing desk that was adjustable, then if you raise this desk, then all of this other stuff just comes up with it. So it's a really great way to, you know, create something that's as customizable for your setting. Even if your setting changes, if you raise everything, if you lower everything, everything is going to move with it. So you have that versatility. The pros. Okay, so there are certain advantages and disadvantages to everything that I have set up here. One of the pros is that there is no post unless you want it. You know, what I'll probably end up doing is bringing it into Adobe Premiere and just trimming the head and the tail, because there's a lot of space as I was preparing to talk in the beginning, and, you know, there's probably going to be some clacking on my keyboard at the end. But other than that, you know, everything is done. You don't have to create the fades between sources. You don't have to composite one thing on top of the other. You know, everything's already baked in and pretty much ready to go. All my audio processing is done on the front end rather than the back end. It's all done before recording or during recording rather than after recording. There are probably ways to improve it, but, you know, as much as possible, I want to do that before I record so that I don't have to do anything after I record. Everything connects via USB, which is good. It's a universal serial bus for a reason. You know, my camera's USB, my microphone's USB, my lights aren't USB, they're just powered by a power switch. You know, other than that, pretty much every computer has some form of USB, so it's a pretty versatile way of working. Compatible on Mac, PC, and Linux. So I know that Open Broadcast software is compatible in all three platforms. I have to double check whether Virtual Audio Cable is, if you were to use Adobe, and I don't quite remember if Adobe is compatible on Linux as well. No, actually I do know. no, I'm thinking of Resolve. I don't know which of the other ones are compatible on Linux, but I have a sneaking suspicion that pretty much all of this software is compatible in any operating system that you are working in. Anything that runs on a desktop can be demoed in real time with sound. So, like I said in my in my previous comments, you know, I wanted something where if you had to sketch something on your desktop, you could totally demo that. If you wanted two cameras, you know, you can have both cameras as sources. If you wanted to play a video on your computer, you can play that video and have the sound come through, and get those separate channels of audio, and everything happens in real time, so you don't have to combine them later. You know, all of your sources are being recorded at the same time. All of your decisions in your live recording are saved in your video. So what else can you demo? Like I said, you could do a coding demo. You can, if you're playing a game, obviously you can, you know, do that. Pretty much everything is self-contained. And your setup can be configured for wherever and however you're most comfortable presenting. So I'm in my apartment, and it's a very small apartment, but you know, this stuff doesn't take up a lot of room, which is good. That was one of my requirements. You know, if you wanted to work in your office, for example, you could totally set this up in your office, and because everything's just attached to the desk, you can take it down and put it back up as you need it. It's not necessarily a quick process, so I wouldn't suggest that you're able to do that necessarily. But if you have, you know, as long as you have some kind of private space, whatever's most comfortable for you, even if it's a studio, you know, if you want to be able to isolate your sound as much as possible, and if you're comfortable presenting in a studio, then this is something that can be put in a studio as well. As with everything, there are pros and there are cons. One of the biggest is that this setup took a really long time to optimize. Part of this is because as a video person, you know, I want things to be the best quality possible with what I have. But that meant that it took about a week of tinkering and playing with my audio filters and playing with my camera heights and playing with the position of my desk. You know, I actually had to rotate my entire desk 90 degrees to the left, so that I wasn't recording to my entire apartment. Now I'm just recording to this wall in the back. But that took about a day. I have a lot of wires. So, you know, it's a trade-off, as with anything. The more setup, the more time that you spend setting up on the front end before you record means the less time that you're going to have to spend on the back end in post-production to get your video and audio to be at presentable quality. And I'll also mention that, you know, even if you're an engineer, this kind of stuff is not necessarily intuitive, unless you're a video or audio engineer. There are certain, you know, standards of video, standards of audio that aren't universal. You kind of have to know what settings to look for. And as with all technology, you know, there are some weird quirks with everything. So I call this series a DIY series, which is a bit disingenuous because I don't necessarily recommend that you do everything yourself. If you would like a setup that doesn't necessitate, you know, studio staff, post-production staff, it's definitely helpful to at least have someone in your setup that you can consult, who's used to doing this kind of stuff, that can guide you along the way. It's going to save you a lot of time tinkering with these programs. They're going to know what to look for, or they're going to know, you know, how to solve the problems that you come up with, because you are going to run into problems. Pretty much nothing is going to be plug and play. You know, even if you're working with the, you know, the most expensive equipment, the best cameras, the best microphones, nothing is plug and play. And, you know, that's why you need a staff in a studio to help you record. For this setup, you wouldn't necessarily need a studio staff, but you should definitely have someone that you can consult who's used to setting up this kind of stuff, that can help you minimize the time that it takes. This video is an attempt to discuss a lot of what you're going to encounter. But, you know, as with everything, I can't tell you every little process that I had to do in order to get this to work. So like I said, I recommend you have someone that you can at least talk to and bounce ideas off of, and take a look at your setup and suggest how you could make it better. So this next con is a big one, and it's gonna probably determine whether or not you use a setup like this. The con is that you can use live switching, or you can record separate streams, but you cannot do both. Now, this is one of the biggest differences between using a software like Open Broadcast software to switch your video sources, rather than a hardware switcher, like something from Blackmagic, where you could feed different streams of video into a live switch, and then you could feed that into a computer, and then you have an actual hardware switch where you can, you know, push the buttons and switch between your sources. The most hardware solutions are going to have some way of backing up your individual sources as separate video files, and also record the final product with all of your transitions and your composites baked in to the final video. The final video is going to be ready to go to upload, but you'll also have those other separate streams recorded as a backup in case you want to color correct different things independently of other things, in case you want to mute or unmute certain things independent of other things. With this current setup that I have in the software, it's only possible to do one or the other. So you can either bake everything in live and do your live switching, you know, with your hotkeys and you know, set up automatic transitions, but those will be baked in. It's really hard to do something like color correct the little video window that I have going separate from the PowerPoint presentation, especially if you have all those transitions, you know, you don't necessarily know where all of them are. Or you can record all your separate streams in OBS as separate windows and then combine them in post-production. That would allow you the versatility of working with each of the elements individually. However, you cannot do both at the same time. The biggest downside to this in particular is that you have no backup for your content. Like, if everything crashed right now, I would be screwed, because I have no other way I have no alternative. You know, I'd have to record pretty much everything all over, or I'd have to, you know, create a new video, splice them together. If for some reason my audio stopped working and I didn't realize, I have nowhere where that audio is backed up as a separate recording. So it's pretty, like, the idea is for this to be a one and done studio, which unfortunately means that it's a one and done studio, you know. As a video person, I'm not totally comfortable with not having those fail safes. You might be, but I guarantee you at some point it's going to bite you in the butt, and it's probably going to bite me in the butt. But this is one of the sacrifices that you have to make for this kind of setup, because that equipment can cost a lot. Not an ideal sound environment. Like I said, this is just my apartment. My computer's really loud. I have upstairs neighbors that I like to affectionately refer to as Stompy McStomperton. I'm recording next to a window, and there's all kinds of traffic and people right outside, and not a lot of sound dampening. Obviously, a studio would be better, but for me, you know, this is a great environment because I don't have to go anywhere. I can just walk from my couch over to my studio. I can record whenever. I can do it late at night. I can do it early in the morning. I don't have to schedule with anybody. So that's a pro. But the downside of that is that all of my sound has to be processed and filtered, and that leads to sound that isn't as good as it would be in a studio, unfortunately. So what are the next steps, or what are my next videos going to be? The biggest thing is I actually just ordered a green screen, and I'm going to set that up behind me so that you don't have to see the back of my apartment and my blinds and my, you know, liquor cabinet. The green screen's just sitting on my floor right now. I got it in the mail yesterday. The particular green screen that I have is one that I'm actually really excited about. It was more expensive than a typical green screen is going to be, but it's a unit that you can actually just pull the green screen up and collapse it into a rolling base. So like I said, it was a bit more expensive than a traditional green screen, but the worst part about green screens is setting it up so that it's flat, so that it's even, and so that it's hanging from some kind of supports. This doesn't need any supports. It's already flat. It's already even. You just have to bring it up and put it down. And live keying is something that you can do in open broadcast software. And this is very similar to what Day9 does on his Twitch stream, is he has a green screen behind him and he just does the keying live. He doesn't have to do anything in the post-processing. It's all done in real time. So I'm going to be playing with that later today. And then my next video is probably going to be a demonstration of what that would look like in this particular setup. Sound dampening. Like I said, not an ideal sound environment. What I'll probably end up doing is getting a couple foam panels that I can put on some poster board or, some kind of mounting platform. Maybe I'll put some by the window that's over here. Maybe I'll probably put some behind my microphone to create a bit of a screen so that stuff doesn't bounce around as much around the microphone. And then finally, I'm going to do, well, I'm not going to do, but actually my husband is going to do a video demo where he talks about a topic in chemistry. He's a graduate student right now in the chemistry PhD program. And, he loves to teach. And after he graduates, he ideally is going to get some kind of university job where he can teach. And so I've convinced him to do a bit of a demo with this setup that would allow us to see how it works for an actual educator or an actual lecturer or an actual instructor of some sort, because obviously I'm not one. I would love this to be more of a discussion than a lecture, than a presentation. I'd love to hear from you if you let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree with anything I've said. Let me know if you disagree about anything that I've done. I love to hear that stuff because I love to talk about it, and I'd love for you to convince me why you think anything I've done could be better. So my email, michelle.ambrews@gmail.com. My website is michelle-ambrews.com. Feel free to contact me via either. And, thanks for joining me.